Hello students, we will continue from where we left off with the study of Art Nouveau, and I told you that that movement was an anti-reaction against the architecture of the Industrial Revolution, which was very eclectic. It was a combination of historical styles. There was no clarity about what form the modern building should take, or rather what form the building of the industrial period should take. As a result of that, some major change came due to the Art Nouveau, and architects turned away from looking back to the historical styles for their architectural solutions, and they wanted to find new source for their inspiration, and they found that in nature. They started adapting or getting inspired from natural forms, vegetal forms, zoomorphic architecture, biomorphic architecture, as we see in the work of architects like Victor Horta. Now, in the Art Nouveau, one of the architects who was considered to be probably the most radical among them was Antoni Gaudi. He was a Spanish architect from the region of Catalonia in Spain, and he had a very individual style which was mostly an architecture concentrated in Spain, very radical, and his work went beyond the mainstream architecture that was being propagated under the Art Nouveau movement. Now please understand that Art Nouveau was named with different names across Europe, and it's also having a link with the arts and crafts movement of England. I had talked about that earlier. So the work of Antoni Gaudi is probably the most defined work of the Art Nouveau movement, or considered to be the most radical aspect of what came out of the concepts of Art Nouveau. His work has widespread international appeal, and 7 of his works are declared as World Heritage Sites by UNESCO. He is also closely connected with what was called as Catalan Modernism, and though Catalan Modernism has a close link with Art Nouveau, but it is much more sculptural and much more expressive, as I will show you in the works of Gaudi. It has a regional symbolism, and it also has historical references to Catalan architecture, that particular region of Spain. It's central to the identity of Barcelona, the architectural identity of Barcelona, and it's focused on organic forms and structural innovations, and in a sense is also one of the influences on early modernism. The architects connected with this movement are Antoni Gaudi, Louis Dominic I Montaner, and Josep Puig I Cadaflac. I am so sorry, difficult to pronounce these names. These 2 Spanish architects, their works are shown in this slide, that of Louis Dominic and of Josep Puig. Now, when I say Catalan Modernism, I am again reminding you that this is not delinked from Art Nouveau. It is all connected within the wider ambit of Art Nouveau. When you look at the plans of Antoni Gaudi, for example, we find them to be very fresh forms that he achieved or he got by studying the structures of animal skeletons and plants and shells. This, for example, is the plan of a building called Casa Mila that I will show you. This is the plan of a building called the Güell Colonia Güell Park. The exact word we will follow it through. This is called Casa Batlló, and this is the most famous building of Antoni Gaudi, the plan of Sagrada Família. Now, he also had skills in various other crafts which were integrated into his architecture. There was the iron work that he used to do, as you see here, or the work in stained glass, the work in carpentry, and the work in ceramics, or the work with broken ceramic tiles, which came to be known, which is called as trencadis. Colorful trencadis, you take broken ceramic tiles and put them together in a mosaic form, as you see here in the form of a lizard or a reptile, or you see here in this is the work of trencadis, and even in this facade of the Casa Batlló. Now, the method of his working is that he rarely drew detailed plans. He preferred to work with 3D scale models and molding details while he was conceiving the building. And this is particularly true for Sagrada Familia, which we will look at a little more in detail, where thousands of drawings were made for small details, and that were made while the process of the building was going on. It was not, this whole thing was built along the way, drawings were conceived along the way, put together, and how the 3D model was done in Sagrada Familia is also important. We will look at that aspect of what is called as form finding. Now, Casa Batlló, if you want to see how radical it is, let us compare it with the tassel house of Victor Horta. This is the tassel house of Victor Horta, and this is Casa Batlló. Now, when you look at the front facade, as it is, tassel house was a radical departure from what was there in the Industrial Revolution. I talked about it in the last presentation, how Victor Horta's tassel house, the different new things that he brought into this house, the putting in of a mezzanine, house bringing light into the building from different sources, how the facade was completely changed from what was there earlier. But when you compare it to Casa Batlló, even tassel house comes in the shadow. Casa Batlló is completely radical. It is an extreme form of deriving a built form using natural forms or natural features. The roof, for example, looks like the back of a dinosaur, and the facade itself, the whole facade itself looks as if it has been derived from the skin of a reptile. When you look at the columns, we are reminded of the legs of an elephant. When you look at it closely, if you look at the balconies, you are reminded of human skulls. When you look at these column pieces that you see here, you are reminded of the tibia fibula bone structure in the human body. So, he borrowed heavily from natural forms and he brought them literally into his architecture. That is why his architecture is also closely related with organic architecture. I will clarify that later in the presentation, how it differs from Wright's definition of organic architecture. Now, when we come to the interiors of Antoni Gaudi, we see the interiors are flowing interiors without corners or edges. When you go within the building, when you go within the casa, this building, this residential building, you find that the walls are not straight, they are all curved. The entire form is completely fluid. And now, when you compare two of his buildings, Casa Batlló, this one, and then later on Casa Mila, you find a difference happening in the work of Gaudi. Casa Batlló, the earlier work, was mostly about facade treatment, though he did work on the inside also, as you saw the fluidity of the plan. But Casa Mila was a complete plastic treatment of the building. It was not a straight facade in a row housing kind of scheme. It was a completely plastically treated building. And it is also said that his architecture has a certain resemblance, or Casa Batlló has a certain resemblance with Berber architecture of Morocco. This is the example of the Berber architecture of Morocco. Now, Casa Mila is a complete plastic treatment and plan in the overall built form, and this organic forms in an undulating facade and an undulating roof line that you see. When you look at the plan, if you look at the various apartments within the plan, each one is different from the other. The walls are all curvilinear, they are not same as one another. The plans are not, typical floor plans, they are all varying from one another, and very fluid interiors. One building that comes to my mind when I think of this kind of work of Antoni Gaudi is the Hussain Doshi Gufa in Ahmedabad by B.V. Doshi and the artist M.F. Hussain. So, when you go inside, again you find columns poured concrete in RCC as you find in the works of Antoni Gaudi. So, this building, the Casa Mila, is a zoomorphic derivation. The plan essentially is based on the structure of a leaf. As the leaf has veins within it, this plan itself has walls which are like veins within it, and it is a completely plastic treatment. This is the third floor plan of the building. The rooms are irregular, the corridors are curved, and so it's a complete nightmare for an interior designer. But and when you go within the building, then you start really appreciating the beauty of his architecture. These spaces are really interesting and amazing, with rounded, irregular spaced openings within the building, and the roof is in the form of a wave. The entire complex is in cut stone without a straight line. It has wrought iron balconies. I told you that one of the areas he specializes is in ironwork, so you find these wrought iron balconies, and you find that the entire building is vines and waves and foliage all throughout the building. It is represented, these are represented in the building's architecture. Now, it is also, this building is also an innovative use of the steel frame and curtain walls, one of the early buildings to do that. The structural flexibility that we find here, you see here, you find the steel frame of Casa Mila, and that has been cladded over with stone and other materials. Therefore, it does not have traditional load bearing walls, and that is the reason why he can have those curving walls inside in the plan. The plans are open floor plans which can be customized by the residents, which is a major departure from the rigid typical floor plan layouts that were available. And the interior columns also, then you see his structure was so amazing that it does not follow a grid pattern. That means you will not find always column upon column in this building. There is also the provision of natural light that is coming in through a very large courtyard and light wells that he has provided in the building, and so the natural light penetrates deep into the building. Other innovative elements that he used was for the very early days for having elevators and staircases both in the building, and more importantly having an underground residential parking, with the understanding, please remember this was a time when the automobile was just coming into the picture, but he imagined that very soon lot of people will be having their own vehicles, their own cars, and he provided this residential car parking in the building in the underground. So this is one of the very early examples of that. Also, we see the example of biomimicry. Biomimicry is imitating biological systems to create human systems. Now, biomimicry is used in many areas. It is used in aeronautics, it is used in architecture and many other branches of science. And here you find that this catenary arch within the building is derived from the human rib cage, Now, what is a catenary arch? What was this innovation? What he did was, rather I should say, this is an inverted catenary arch. Now, the catenary by itself is a curve which is formed by a free hanging flexible chain under its own weight when supported only at the ends. So, if you hang a chain only supported at its ends, the form it takes is called as a catenary curve or a catenary. Now, if you invert this catenary, what happens is that these forces that are acting in tension, this catenary, which is under tension, if you invert it, this inverted catenary arch that you get is now having the same forces, but now they are in compression. So, this optimal arch that you get, which follows this inverted catenary arch, is the principle that Gaudi used here, and we will look more at it a little later when we talk about form finding. Now, we come to the most famous project that he did, which is still not completed. That is the amazing part. It began in 1882, worked on till 1926, but the Sagrada Familia is still not complete. It is probably one of the most famous buildings, recognizable buildings of Spain even today, besides of course the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao now, and it is a biomorphic and osteomorphic, that means derived from bones kind of form of the Sagrada Familia. It is having these spires going up that you see here, each spire more than 100 meters tall, and they dominate the skyline of Barcelona. Now, when you look at the spires, though they are derived from organic forms, you immediately can make out that this is related to Gothic architecture. Therefore, we say that this is a part of what came to be called as the Neo-Gothic revival, that is the revival of Gothic architecture during this later half of the 19th century or the very early part of the 20th century. The method of working, much before computer modeling came into architecture, he was able to design this impossibly fluid building where each piece would have required thousands of construction drawings as the building went on being constructed. This is some of the pictures of the Sagrada Familia, and you cannot imagine the amount of detail that goes into it. Structurally it is amazing, architecturally it is amazing, sculpturally it has got amazingly detailed sculptures as you would find within the larger ambit of Art Nouveau. It is very monumental and colourful, and being a cathedral, it has got this massive space inside it going towards the front half of the church, and we see biomimicry here. For example, when you look at the columns of the nave of this cathedral, you see these columns here, or this column that you see here. This is the picture of a tree. Now closely the column matches with that. Even the parts of a tree, he has imprinted those parts within the column of the nave. You find them imprinted on the columns of the nave. It's got very intricate sculptural work as you see in all these images here. And now let's come to the aspect of form finding. Now it's an inverted model in pure tension, and it generates a structure which is in pure compression. What you do is, in the mathematical model, you simulate forces acting on a structure under tension. So if you take a catenary, you hang it like this, so you are having a structure or a catenary which is under pure tension. So here, for example, if you see this picture, this is the structural model of Sagrada Familia inverted. He has hung the entire structural model of Sagrada Familia where all the forces on these nodes, on these structural pieces is coming in tension. So you are able now to see the shape and size of the tensile elements that are supporting the structure, and since it is just hanging, it is naturally happening. Those tensile forces are the natural tensile forces acting on the structure. Now this model, if it is flipped, then it becomes the inverted model where the same tensile forces are now working in compression. Now how do you do that? You either place a mirror underneath the model and you get the picture of the model, or you take the photograph of the model, and this is what they have done. So what I have done is, I have flipped the picture for you. So now when you flip the picture, now you get the Sagrada Familia, the structural forces acting on it in compression. So the form in pure tension finally becomes a form in pure compression. The tensile elements are replaced with compressive elements. This was the very simple but a brilliant understanding of form finding. Now the same thing you find in another project which I was mentioning earlier in the plan also, the Church of Colonia, Güell by Antoni Gaudi. He inverted the physical model. So this is the physical model where all the forces are acting in tension, and this is then inverted to be able to get that how the same forces are now going to be there in compression. Now please understand, this understanding of form finding that I am giving you is a very simplistic understanding. It is much more complicated than this, and those who work with computer simulation models of working with structures like this will be able to tell you this in much more detail. So my understanding, or the way that I am explaining form finding to you, is the very fundamental basis of how form finding came into architecture. So because of these inverted physical models, there is more flexibility to explore very organic, very fluid designs, since every adjustment that you make in this inverted model, it triggers a physical recomputation of the optimal arches. You are able to get the kind of arches that you want as you keep on calibrating it, and the tensile forces naturally provide that shape that you need. Because of this iterative process of adjustment of the shape of the structure until it meets the desired structural and aesthetic criteria that you are looking for, and then when you flip it you get the building that you want with forces working in compression. Such forms today are a combination of both physical models and mathematical calculations or computational models. So, form finding today, for example, is suspending the physical model of the structure from above and having these downward tensile forces. The model is allowed to settle into this natural equilibrium shape under tensile forces on the cables, on the hanging cables. Then we analyze the shape of the model and the forces acting on it. Designer gets the optimal shape and size of the structural elements for the final structure that will be in the inverted form. Now, one of the most important architects to work in this area of form finding in the modern times is Frei Otto, both an architect and a structural engineer from Germany, who pioneered the use of form finding in design of tensile structures. And this building that you see here is called the Mannheim Multi-Hall, a very large exhibition hall that Frei Otto designed and came up in 1975. So, here you find the inverted model with the tensile forces which are indicated here, and then that is flipped and then you get the Mannheim multi-hall. This technique allowed them to design very lightweight and efficient structures which could span very large distances and with minimal materials, as you see here in the interior pictures. Of course, there are many buildings like you see like that today. You find this kind of lightweight efficient structures in many in art galleries and museums and airports, etc., with very large spans and large distances covered with minimal use of material, and these large volumes could be encased thus in a single envelope. There is one single envelope in which the entire building has been encased. Now, therefore, he developed many innovative techniques for lightweight structures through the concept of form finding. One of the most important structures that Frei Otto designed was the Munich Olympic Stadium in 1972, where he used these tensile structures to cover the seating area of the stadium. Architecturally, it is remembered for this particular Munich Olympic Stadium. Now, computational form finding has continued. Form finding has now become much more complex with computational modeling, and you find that, for example, in the Heydar Aliyev Center in Azerbaijan by Zaha Hadid in 2012, you find that in the Milwaukee Art Museum in USA by Santiago Calatrava in 2001. So, this is a picture showing computational form finding in both these buildings. Then there are other famous tensile structures. There is the Khan Shetir Entertainment Center in Kazakhstan by Norman Foster. There is the Hajj Terminal in Jeddah by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill that came up in 1981. And then there is the Millennium Dome in London by Richard Rogers in 1999. Now, if you just even look at the timeline, you see that these tensile structures have been continuously evolving throughout the 20th and into the 21st century. For example, the Hajj Terminal is in 1981, Millennium Dome, which is now called the O2 Arena, came up in 1999, and the Khan Shetir Entertainment Center came up in 2010. Another project of Antoni Gaudi was the Güell Park in Barcelona. In this you find very curved classical Renaissance forms and very colorful trencadis, for which this is, there is a lot of trencadis that is used in the Güell Park. Now, when I was thinking of trencadis and the way Gaudi has used it, I was reminded of another project in India. It is in Chandigarh. It is a project called the Rock Garden by Nek Chand, and this project also has trencadis. The use of broken ceramic tiles to make interesting artwork like this or to make sculptures like this. So, we also have an example within our country. Then this is how organic and fluid his built forms are. This is the keeper's house he designed in the Güell Park. These are some of the other images of the Güell Park. And moving forward, one architect who has a very close resemblance to the work of Antoni Gaudi in our times is Santiago Calatrava. And very interestingly, Calatrava is also a Spanish architect who was born in Valencia in Spain, and in fact he is referred to as the modern Gaudi. He also studied architecture with a post-graduation in urbanism. Then he also studied civil engineering, and his structures are marvelous. What Gaudi achieved using RCC and other such materials of that time, Calatrava works in steel to achieve those amazing organic structures, natural form like structures, skeletal structures in our times today. He also got a doctorate in technical science and with a dissertation that he did on the foldability of space frames. Now, Calatrava is also referred to as a starchitect. It's a new term that has come up in our modern times. Who is a starchitect? To understand that, you first have to understand what is called as the Bilbao effect. What is the Bilbao effect? In 1997, a museum came up in Bilbao, Spain called the Guggenheim Museum. All of you would be most probably knowing about this museum, designed by Frei, built on the architectural concept of deconstructivism. This was an astounding building. Whether you like it or you dislike it, you cannot reject it. It is an amazing form, and when it came up in Bilbao, at that time the economy of Bilbao was very weak. But because of this building, within a matter of years, they started getting a huge amount of resources, amount of money, because of the number of tourists that were coming to Bilbao to see this building. So they got a lot of revenue as a result of this building being in Bilbao and the tourist influx into the city. This then came to be referred as the Bilbao effect, that if you design a building in a city by a star architect, then that building attracts a lot of tourism. So there is a whole range of architects who are referred to as architects today, like Frei and Zahadid, who unfortunately passed a few years back, and Santiago Calatrava. They are architects who are making very individual and unique pieces of architecture in different cities globally, and that is then referred to as the Bilbao effect because of the attraction it results in and the revenue the building generates. Now, one of the buildings that Calatrava designed, because I am trying to connect this with the work of Gaudi, and please also understand that I'll continuously go to and fro so that I can connect the buildings of the past with the buildings of today. So the Milwaukee Art Museum, which came up in 2001 by Calatrava, as you can see this building, it's an amazing organic structure, fluid structure in steel, and normally he works with steel painted white. It's a very innovative use of materials. So if you compare Gaudi with Calatrava, Gaudi used to work with RCC, ceramics, stone and iron. Calatrava works with steel, concrete, glass and advanced composites. Couple of these materials, at least advanced composites, were really not there at the time when Gaudi was working. So here I am comparing the Milwaukee Art Museum with Sagrada Familia. The interior of the Milwaukee Art Museum and the space it generated with the interior of the Sagrada Familia. Then again, when you compare these two Spanish architects, both of them are inspired by or from living organisms. Both of them integrate art and architecture, and without a doubt both of them have a very iconic and unique style of architecture. These are some of the projects of Calatrava: the Milwaukee Art Museum, the Lisbon Orient Station in Portugal, the Science Museum in Spain, the Queen Sofia Palace of Arts in Spain, and these are some of the projects of Antoni Gaudi. So again, when you compare both of them, there is a structural expression, that is, the structure is, the building is being expressed through its structure, and both of them have incorporated innovative structural systems. And so here is a comparison of two images of one building, which is the Güell Park of Gaudi, with Milwaukee Art Museum of Calatrava, and you compare the interiors, they are very much alike. This is a pathway or a walkway outside the Güell Park building, and I am comparing it to a walkway which is in steel in the Milwaukee Art Museum. In Gaudi's case it is in stone, and in Calatrava's case very similar kind of space, but it is in steel. Now, another comparison can be drawn between the organic architecture of Antoni Gaudi and Frank Lloyd Wright. Both of them practiced their version of organic architecture. What was the difference? One, if I can just put it in a general sense, the difference was Gaudi's interpretation was a literal interpretation. If a building's plan is to be there, it is literally in the form of a leaf. Whereas Frank Lloyd Wright's organic architecture was more about a conceptual understanding. So here we have the two important residential buildings, the Casa Mila of Gaudi compared to the Falling Water of Frank Lloyd Wright. Now, if we just go deeper into that comparison, let us look at the inspiration. Gaudi was directly inspired, or rather directly input natural forms and structures into his buildings. In Wright's case, it was more about the harmony of building with the landscape and with human needs. When you look at the buildings of Gaudi, you are reminded immediately of biomorphic and zoomorphic forms. You are reminded of lizards and dinosaurs and elephants and bone structures. The same is not true for Frank Lloyd Wright. You are not reminded of organic forms because his buildings are very straightforward. But what you are reminded of when you look at his buildings is there is a harmony between the landscape and the building. He said the house should be off the hill and not on the hill. That means when you make a house, for example, on a hill, it should not be separate from the hill, but rather it should as if it is a part of the hill. When you look at the aesthetic between the two, Gaudi's work is highly decorative and symbolic, with very intricate details and very lavish, vivid use of color. Wright's work, on the other hand, is much more simple. It is using natural materials in their natural finish. Brick in natural finish, or concrete, then he would keep it and then keep it as it is, and then integration of the building with the site. So here I have compared the Park Güell of Gaudi with the bulk house of Wright in 1911. The structural approach. Gaudi often used complex geometries and innovative structures that were inspired by natural form. Wright, on the other hand, his structural system was more straightforward, focusing on harmonious spaces which were flowing with the landscape. But I will make one addition here. Several of Wright's buildings are a very amazing example of structural innovation, whether it is the cantilevers, for which he became very famous, the use of cantilevers in Falling Waters, or even in the Johnson Wax building, the kind of form he achieved here in the Unitarian Church, the kind of form he achieved in the Unity Temple, the kind of form he achieved in most of all, if you want to compare, with the Guggenheim Museum in New York, which is an inverted frustum. And those are amazing structural examples of Wright, and in the later presentations we will look at those examples in detail. So we will end with this presentation here, and again I would like to tell you that Gaudi's contribution to architecture has been immense. The only thing is his work has not been replicated. You don't find many other buildings coming up in the style in which Gaudi made them. But there is no doubt about it that his contribution to the Art Nouveau movement was immense, and the kind of structural innovations and concepts he came up with were very necessary, very important for the early modernism that followed. So by ending this presentation here, I am concluding my conversation on Art Nouveau, and we have talked about it in complete detail. One aspect that we will again look at in Art Nouveau is the work of C.R. Mackintosh, and we will look at that work in trying to connect it to early modernism directly, how those buildings of C.R. Mackintosh and some more architects directly led to the early forms of modernism. Thank you.